Hello and welcome to another episode of the Therapist Connect podcast. My name is Dr. Peter Blundell and I'm back interviewing therapists about their life and work. Now, the next selection of episodes that are coming out over the next few months are slightly delayed. They were recorded back in 2024. So some of the references that are made in the recordings might be talked about in the past tense or times that have gone by. And it's just been some issues in terms of editing and making sure that these got released. So apologies to all my guests for that delay, but I hope you still enjoy these episodes as much as I did recording them. So in this particular episode, I'm interviewing Dr. Beichman, who is a humanist, integrative, pluralistic therapist. And we talk about each of these aspects of his practice in this episode. Jay has over 25 years experience as a therapist and has a private practice in central Brighton. He's also writing a book on pluralism and how this relates to therapists and therapy, which we also talk about. If you'd like to support this podcast, please share with colleagues and leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform. Hi, Jay, how are you doing?
Okay, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. Long time no see or speak. It's about you, but what made you train as a therapist then in the first place?
Yeah, well, I mean, I go along with the model of, I'm not sure that all therapists are wounded healers, but I think certainly a lot of them are. And I'm one of them. Basically, so my wounds, if you like, the first thing, I was actually brought up in America until I was about 6 or 7. Oh. And then because my parents got divorced and my mum came back to England and my dad stayed in America, I kind of lost my home, which I didn't actually think about until I went into therapy. But, when I did go into therapy in my late 20s, my first therapist, said, that must have been, and this is what's so great about therapy, like the way it validates her and it's or makes you think about it. She said, that must have been tough, sort of leaving your home and country and everything when you're 6 or 7. 9. Yes, maybe it was. Yeah. Oh God, I hadn't really thought, because it was my normal, if you like. But I do retrospectively see that as a kind of wounding, and the divorce, of course. Yeah. And then because of the divorce, my parents wanted me to be out of the way. So I had a brief spell in a boarding school, which was another kind of pain, loss, wound. And then when I was 13, my father killed himself, and that was huge. I mean, that's my biggest wound. I mean, I think everything in my life really follows from that. And then, I thought, oh, great, well, at least I still got my mum. And then my mum died when I was 21 or 22, which was another wound. And and then I had sort of alongside that adolescence, early adulthood, I had a sort of few, sort of went off the rails, basically. So I ended up on the wrong side of the mental health thing, in hospitals. And so I was very interested in that. And then, I used to read R.D. Laing when I was in my sort of late teens. And then, so eventually I ended up going to a therapist. And then because I was seeing a therapist, I sort of saw this flyer for an introduction to counselling course that was basically trying to flog a postgraduate diploma course, not the one I ended up on. And then I thought, well, after I did that, I thought, well, I did end up interviewing for a postgraduate diploma at University of Brighton, and the rest is history, as they say. Yeah.
So there's a lot that happened, didn't it, before like the age of 22 or something?
Yeah. So, and then also, I mean, I also think my mum was a nurse and my dad was an academic. And I often say, like, if you cross an academic with a nurse, what do you get? You get a therapist. So maybe it was like inevitable. Yeah.
And a therapist is writing a book now, So
yeah.
Yeah, so that's what led you into the profession, and then how did your career develop then? How long have you been a therapist for now?
I got my qualification in 1990, well, the postgraduate diploma in 1998, turned that into a master's in 2002,
Okay.
and then got the doctorate in 2018.
Okay. You've been like a therapist like 25 years or something?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah. Yeah, it's quite a long time.
Yeah.
Where did the time go? Yeah. What have I done in my career? Like, well, I mean, to begin with, I, like most people, couldn't get much work as a paid therapist. So I did my voluntary work for a bit, but also I think got a job in something that basically I was a mental health project worker, which working in a residential homes, actually not just one, but a few of them, and I was on the bank, so that was really a great way of doing it, because the more clients I got, the less hours I would do at the mental health project. Until eventually I did build it up so that the guy sort of rang me up and said, "Do you still want to be on this list, Jay?" And I said, because I hadn't taken any shifts in so long, and I said no, and that was like quite a moment, actually. No, I can let go of this.
Yeah.
But it very nearly didn't work out. I was that close to becoming a mental health advocate, which I would have loved doing, but the reason I was going for that was because I wasn't getting work as a therapist. But then I kind of hit gold by meeting someone from the East Sussex County Council, and they had their own in-house counselling and therapy service. And she said to me, "Oh, we really don't have enough male therapists. Maybe you should apply." And I'd applied for so many things by that point. I was kind of completely lost heart. But I thought, okay, sent off my application in the post in those days. And
25 years ago.
Yeah, 20 years. And less than a week later, I sort of seeing my first clients with the council, and that was great, because we were in-house therapists. They treated us with real respect. We had quarterly meetings where we'd sit around a table, and sandwiches were provided, and cups of tea and coffee, and we'd go through all the issues and stuff. I mean, a golden era, really. And then I kind of got picked up work with EAPs and insurance companies. I did spend 1 year working for the NHS in a surgery, of course, not paid.
Really?
Yeah, I was an honorary counsellor. I mean, it was only a couple of hours a week, and I did it because I combined it with, I did a specialist training in primary care at the Tavistock. That was great, and that was only a few hours a week. So, but to make it worth it, you needed to have some experience. So, basically I was probably taking almost a day out a week to sort of make myself NHS ready. But, I was never ready enough for them, because they, as keep on moving the goalposts. And there's always people with more experience than you. I think I wanted results quicker than they were going to arrive. And I certainly wasn't going to work for more than a year for free at that stage in my career. So I gave that up. And and then since then, clients, EAPs, insurance companies, the masters, doctorate. I got involved. How I've probably crossed paths with you is maybe through the sort of more political side of things. Yeah, I ended up joining the Psychotherapy and Counselling Union, and I don't know if that's how we met, like online, because we've only met online. We haven't met in real life. Basically, I became involved with the EAP campaign group because I work for EAPs. I became involved with the EAP campaign group in the PCU. And then through that, I became the South East regional representative. I've left now. But that's been a good experience. I still help moderate the forum, for better or worse. And then, I mean, for ages, I was part of this group called Sussex Counselling and Psychotherapy, and we put on seminars and socials and things like that. And I edited the newsletter that we did for a bit.
I feel like
yeah.
political activism's kind of like been part of, like, that's how we met, and kind of I feel like
Yes.
that's been part of your career in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I try not to get involved, but can't help myself. Because as you know, it can get quite time consuming. I mean,
Yeah.
like, I managed to give it all up for this year to write the book. But yeah, being part of the PCU was pretty time consuming while it lasted.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, I do sort of miss that. And I really like the Therapist Connect idea, because that's sort of something that seems to be missing. I mean, when I first started as a student, trainee, and after, Sussex Counselling and Psychotherapy was sort of the go-to place for seminars and meeting other therapists, and socials, at seminars, and all of that, and that seems to have gone now.
Mm.
There's a lot of online communities now, but trying to get people to meet up in real life,
Yeah.
sort of seems to be quite difficult. Certainly in a place as small as Brighton.
No, I agree with that, and I wonder whether, I don't know if you've seen a shift, like, a lot of people were not out the pandemic, but since the pandemic, I think a lot of people went online, and then a lot of things haven't actually been returned to being in person.
Yeah, and I can, there's good reasons for that, but there's also a loss of things. I mean, that's what killed Sussex Counselling and Psychotherapy, because we still had a market, if you like, for people who wanted in-person events that weren't too expensive, because it was a non-profit. There are things that you can go to in person in Brighton, but they're pretty expensive, whereas we could put on a seminar for, you could come and do it for 20 quid or whatever, not much. Yeah. And then we'd have free socials and things like that.
Yeah. And then that's the bit that's missing with online, isn't it? Is you don't necessarily get to chat to people like you would do in an in-person. I mean, there is breakout rooms and stuff, but
it's not quite the same.
No.
Yeah. And then this sort of community and like helping each other more indirectly. I mean, say something like there's a group which you probably know called Private Practice Online. It's a Facebook page, or it's called Private Practice, I think. And then all this information you get there now, like about different EAPs, insurance companies, how much they pay, what they're like, whether they don't pay, and all that sort of stuff. But this was all this information was gathered much more informally when I got here. And then, like, you kind of keep who you're working for to yourself, because it's like, oh God, everyone's telling everybody who they work for and things like, and I suppose that's sort of fine now, but in a local, it's like if you told everyone who you worked for, I mean, they'd take all your work, wouldn't they? I mean, in the local area, or maybe that's scarcity consciousness, I don't know. But anyway, me and my colleague, we would give each other all the information, but it was all hush hush.
But it's interesting that thinking about that change of how information is shared between people now, and how much is publicly available. I mean, it's unbelievable, really. There's pretty much any topic you could have a good Google, and there'd be a forum somewhere with somebody talking about it. So
and that information like that sort of easier to get hold of. Which is great in some ways. And hopefully in the end, from a political perspective, a union perspective, could lead to better outcomes for private therapists, potentially. If we know, and who to boycott, and who to invest in.
I was just thinking that'd make a really interesting research project to see the actual impact of some of those forums and where the information's held. What do you think is the biggest challenge that the counselling and psychotherapy profession faces at the moment?
I mean, the most obvious thing is scope, isn't it? At the micro level, in terms of just its content and the process it's sort of indicating, but also the huge implications of the future of how counselling and psychotherapy is aligned, viewed going forward. Because basically, I suppose it's trying to form a basic structure, and if you have a good basic structure to kind of house everything in, then everything else works. But if your foundations and structures are kind of a bit of a mess, then everything else is going to be a mess too. Yeah. So it's not that I'm against the idea of some kind of structure, not at all. I think there should be a structure, but I think we need a more coherent structure. No, so okay, the people that invented it would say it's coherent, but it's coherent in specific ways. I mean, I go along with basically the people who are against the hierarchical nature of it, which I think could so easily be changed. There's a I mean, I spoke about Scoped in some when it came out, like on some of the videos, and and one of the people on the panels was Dr. Emma Radway Bright. I don't know what's happened to her, but she was talking about how you could even have something like Scoped, but just get rid of the columns. Just get rid of the columns, and then people could sort of earn the badges, from whatever column they wanted, depending on their interest. So say, for instance, I've got nothing, say, you mean like working in a psychiatric or, establishment of some kind, whether it's a mental health project or a hospital or a sort of eating disorder unit or whatever it is. Yeah, okay. Personally, I think people are just people, and then you don't necessarily, and this idea that, they're so severe and enduring that, unless you've kind of got some sort of specialist training, you can't possibly deal with their stuff. It's in a way it's like stigmatizing, and that actually, if you actually work in mental health with these things, you still have to, the best thing you can do is just be human as you possibly can. And that's like the beneficial, it's not like you have to be an expert in diagnosis to work in a mental health project. Far from it, but in any case, if you thought you did need a badge, then you just kind of, okay, whether you're like A, B, or C, but you'd get rid of those things, okay, you can get your mental health badge. There's no reason that you have to study for 10 years so that you can work with people who are diagnosed with something. So, yeah, and then the related pressure around statutory regulation, which I notice is coming up again in the mainstream media like The Guardian. I don't see the need or point of statutory regulation myself. I understand there's good arguments for it, but I think some of the arguments for it are misguided. I mean, like the main one being that it's going to protect the public. I don't see that statutory regulation is going to protect the public,
I agree with that. I think I see a lot of discussions about that in different social media groups, and it seems to me that there's a talk about protection of the public, and then when people raise the issue of, it's not likely to do that because people will still be practicing unethically as they do in all of the professions that are regulated. I see people quite quickly move to the argument of, yes, but it will increase the standing of the profession. And I think one of the difficulties that I have with that is actually who you're giving power to define what the profession is and how it looks. And I think that's my issue with regulation in terms of, I think we're kind of like opening the doors to something there that we're not going to have control of very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, like when you see what a mess the state has made of therapy in the NHS, really, this is who you want to control all of therapy, whether it's in the NHS or the state or the third or privately or third sector. And that's another thing. Like it or not, most therapists operate in the private sector. So you kind of got this great big wieldy hammer of the state that's, wants to be in charge of people who work as independent practitioners. Now, maybe there's some justification for statutory regulation for people who work in the state. And effectively, that's what they're already doing with their in-house NHS trainings. But
that's what happened to social work. So
Yeah.
social work became regulated, and now the social work roles are statutory roles most of the time, and they are governments of agents of the government, and doing legal stuff and statutory stuff and safeguarding stuff, and which is important work in some respects, but then actually misses this whole other wealth of work that social workers used to be a part of and that no longer are. And instead of being called social workers, they're called support workers, and they get paid a lot less money.
Exactly. Well, and that's what happens in the NHS. Even that's what I kind of say as well. It's like, okay, say you, the ideal is to regulate the titles of counsellor and psychotherapist, which is a problematic in itself. But say you do that, then, and people, all they have to do to avoid that regulation is call themselves something like, for instance, a psychological wellbeing practitioner, which, as far as I know, is not a regulated title, even
or a therapist,
or a therapist, or a life coach, or whatever, so you're always going to have. It's so easy to bypass completely. Therapist isn't regulated. So this kind of and then also, I mean, I think part of the problem is which is maybe more political and philosophical, and that's sort of maybe part of my book, is that to me, I don't recognize any difference between counselling and psychotherapy. So to me, Scopes is all about, whether they say it or not, trying to institutionalize a difference between counselling and psychotherapy. So I don't agree with the premise. And I think as far as the therapy field goes, it might be more useful if we agreed that counsellors and psychotherapists are doing more or less the same thing. And we're okay with maybe a gradation within that, senior accredited or junior or something, possibly, or badges. I think badges, I like the idea of badges, that you're basically qualified and you can get extra badges if you want. Yeah. And then I can see why psychotherapists want that, because they train for twice the period and have twice as many hours on the point of graduation, not obviously over a career, but on the point of graduation. So then I think there needs to be an agreement. Okay, let's meet each other halfway. You're qualified not after, say, 2 years or 4 years, but maybe 3. Yeah. Or that for people that have only done 2 years, with the accumulation of enough badges, they are, get the same status as everybody else.
What would be the point of that? Just to make people happy that that their work was recognized, was recognized in some way. It's just.
Well, I mean, I think there is sort of misperceptions of what's going on. Yeah. And a lot of people sort of think of counselling and counsellors as a sort of lesser type of therapy, and they don't even know what it is. Yeah. And they'll like to find counselling as just supportive chat or something. Yeah. Whereas actually counsellors are just as likely to have studied psychodynamic therapy, Gestalt therapy, person-centered therapy, CBT even, so this sort of myth that counselling is sort of some sort of lesser form of therapy is just wrong. And so, I mean, I think the starting point needs to be that it's the same thing. And then that would allow therapy to, I mean, as a pluralist, I don't necessarily, if I really thought that there was a huge difference between counselling and psychotherapy, I think, fine, hold on to your counselling identity. Hold on to your psychotherapy identity. But I don't think there's any substantial differences. So pretending there are, is just wrong. Yeah. Not all the evidence sort of shows that there's not much difference. Yeah. Anything substantial. And that it would be better for everyone if we kind of just got rid of this hierarchical distinction. which came about because because the medical profession wanted to own psychotherapy. So it goes back to other people wanting to own psychotherapy back in the day.
And that's where I think regulation might lead to in terms of who owns counselling and psychotherapy in the long run. But
yes,
that's a much bigger discussion. I was going to skip the question about how you define your therapeutic approach, but you just said there as a pluralist. But I suppose I wanted to know, have you always been a pluralist, and has that changed over time, or yeah?
I don't think. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I would have even known the word very well until 2011. I identified with humanistic and still do. I'm mostly a humanistic practitioner. Some people thought my postgraduate diploma at Brighton was person-centered, but I still got a handbook. It's very plainly stated that it's a humanistic course because we also studied TA and Gestalt and stuff. So I identify with that, and definitely the values of humanistic therapy. I'm not medical model. I've got problems with the psychodynamic take on things, not the theory, but the practice. And I also, don't think, behavioral is enough, and it's not enough of an explanation. So I'm into the sort of more human potential orientated therapies that are informed not just by medicine or psychology, but also literature and art and everything. And then, integrative isn't too much of a jump from that. So I suppose I was loosely integrative as well as humanistic, maybe humanistic hyphen integrative. And then now, I mean, on my card, I basically put all three words. I put humanistic, integrative, pluralistic. And, and one of the arguments in my book is that integrative and pluralistic are actually have quite different values.
Even though you label yourself as an integrative.
Yeah. In some ways it doesn't make sense, but, that's like a conversation that me and clients can have, if we need to go that far.
Yeah.
I mean, to my mind, pluralistic encapsulates everything. So pluralistic, if you like, is the word at the top of the tree. And then underneath that, you would have humanistic, integrative, psychodynamic, et cetera. But whereas for some people, integrative is at the top of the tree and pluralistic comes underneath integrative. Now, I don't buy that myself. That's not the way I look at it. But I might be in a minority of one there. I'm not sure.
Well, and I think you're going to unpack some of that in your forthcoming book, aren't you? But I also think that's kind of what's needed first, isn't it? Is that first book to kind of go, look, this is all the different types of pluralism, what we're actually talking about.
I'm writing that chapter at the moment. I'm writing about a chapter called Common Factors in the Integrative Movement, in which I try and sort of say, look, it's not this quite... we like common factors. As a pluralist, I like common factors. I like the integrative movement, but there are dangers in it. Yeah. For instance, a push for a sort of unified type of generic therapy where it all has to be evidence-based, including interventions. And some people suggest if it's not, that you might actually be unethical. Whereas I can't go a lot, I sort of, as a pluralist, support the right of a therapeutic approach to be irreducible, and just the whole thing, without every single aspect of it being evidence-based, even if you could evidence-base every single aspect of it,
And for me, that's where, as a person-centered practitioner, I suppose I struggle because I don't always feel like we can fully evidence-based what we're doing. Some of it is based on my experience as a therapist with my clients and not necessarily on the research evidence that is out there.
Absolutely. I mean, one of my big angles in the book and everything is that I see therapy as more of an art than a science, and that it's like the quality of it is through practice. It's a practice. There's a postmodernist therapist or psychologist called Polkinghorne who basically talked about the practice of psychology as sort of being the second psychology. and that it should be looked at in a completely different way to the first psychology, which is sort of about theory, and research, but, practicing being a person who's in interaction with people. Your learning is actually on the job with people. Yeah. But, there's a lot of people invested in it being different to that. If you are a researcher, you're probably going to tell everybody that research really matters. You'd be out of a job if you didn't keep on plugging that. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. And I suppose I find that interesting, because I feel like I am a researcher, but also person-centered practitioner. And so I can understand how my worldview might change if I stopped with therapy and only went down the research route, and that kind of just reinforming yourself, this is you're finding the solutions, you're finding the answers, and this is the only path. And quite often working as a therapist, that challenges my own view as a researcher and what can actually be discovered and researched and found out, it's interesting. And I imagine it's the same for you as a therapist and writing this book at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of common factors, I've sort of just plowed through yesterday, actually, the great psychotherapy debate by Wampold and Immel, which just has so much research around why common factors might be the answer, aren't the answer. This researcher says this, and, and like real kind of standard deviations and all that quantitative stuff, as well as quality. Oh God! But I don't think I'm going to put it in there. I mean, it's too much for me. I think it's almost too much for my reader. I don't know. Maybe.
And does it help us become better therapists? I suppose that's my question around that kind of stuff. Like, does this help me to be in better relationship with my client?
Yeah. I mean, it just offers. I mean, I think he's got an agenda. He wants to prove that. These sort of common factors around the relationship or whatever are what matters, and that all this, which is really important, because if you've got the medical model, which, the assumption is that one treatment is better than another. So then and then one thing that I kind of thought about putting in, which is I found the most interesting thing of my trudging through this yesterday, was there was one study I think he cites in America, basically comparing one therapy with another therapy, randomized control trial, to basically come to the conclusion that there's not much difference. And then the clanger is, he says, and that trial cost $11 million. And randomized control trials are hugely expensive. And if you think of all the money that could be better spent doing not necessarily better research even, but just actually giving people therapists.
Yeah.
$11 million, that's a lot of therapy hours, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. Oh no, I think it's gonna be really interesting. I'm looking forward to reading it. So
great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to finishing it.
Is there anything that surprised you writing the book when you kind of were exploring some of this stuff? Has anything come as a surprise?
Yeah, how much I don't know, because once you get into it, it's like just vast literatures. Because the problem, you see, because I'm trying to explain how the philosophy of pluralism can be applied to therapies and therapists.
Yeah.
From a philosophical point of view, but immediately you then got a split, because there's the pluralistic philosophy, and then there's also the pluralistic political philosophy, which also has a few different meanings, depending on whether you're talking about Isaiah Berlin's value pluralism, which basically means that sometimes you have values which are almost irreconcilable. You can't have both. So, for instance, you might have a value of freedom, which seems like a good value, a reasonable value, but you also then might have a value of the right to peace and quiet. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then if you got a noisy neighbor,
Yeah.
whose value is more important?
Yeah.
So that applies to lots of things, and that's sort of political philosophy. But then when Americans talk about it, they kind of quite often are meaning that you've got different centers of power, like the judiciary, the Congress, etc. And when the UK people talk about it, they're kind of going back to sort of unions, being a sort of center of power, as well as so there's all these different, that's just the political philosophy. And then when you kind of get to the philosophy, you've got lots of people who either call themselves pluralists or have been called pluralists, and they can differ quite a lot. So then you've got, say, William James, whose pluralism really covers ontology, which is, what you think the nature of being is, epistemology, what you think actually can be known, and ethics, and other things, but methodology too. So you got James, it's quite a broad vision of pluralism. And then you've got Levinas, who's also a pluralist, but he's talking about ethics over ontology, which is part of what the debate has been between pluralistic people and person-centered people. Whether ethics is more important than ontology, and the person-centered people know that the ontology is actually really important about the I always forget the name. It's not organismic valuing tendency. It's the gross
organismic valuing process,
or organismic valuing process, or the something tendency.
The actualizing tendency.
Actualizing tendency. Yeah. I don't know. I've got a real block on that.
It's not the easiest of language, actually.
Yeah. So then again, like, you've got a plurality of pluralisms, and in fact, I mean, one book which has really informed my thinking about this book, kind of godsend that it came out when it did, is a book called Ever Not Quite, Pluralisms in William James, in which he basically says, that you're never ever quite there and sort of knowing everything you need to know, and that's partly because of time. So say, like, we worked out everything we needed to know about therapy today. So what? Because tomorrow something new would come along. So, and
as a therapist, you're just constantly on a learning process all the time, aren't you? Because
and that is like a dimension of pluralism, if you like, is the time dimension. It's not just talking about what we know already. It's talking about, well, what else is coming up, Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to reading it. It's going to be very interesting.
I hope so. Yeah.
It will be. I think we're coming to the end now, but I suppose I just want to check in with you. What are your future plans? I know you're working on your book at the moment, so that's kind of the main thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, finish that off, and then I suppose, like, promote that as much as I can, so hopefully sells more than 15 copies or whatever. I want to get more and more into writing. I mean, I kind of see that so much. I want to do more writing, more thinking, more reading. Still have a client caseload, but less, so that I've got more time for writing, thinking, and reading. And maybe not as big a project as this one, like I say, sort of things I can easily handle, like 500-word blogs, 1,000-word blogs, and maybe looking towards doing some kind of self-help book next for people. For people generally, from what I sort of reckon has helped people over the years in my practice.
Fantastic. Well, you're a busy man. Yeah. Well, when your book's ready, Jay, you've got to come back on, and we'll do a little interview about the book and promo, and we can put the link into this podcast as well.
Okay, I'd love to do that. Yeah, and it probably will be at least a year from now.
Brilliant. Thanks
a lot, Peter. I really enjoyed doing the interview. Thanks a lot.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for asking me, and hopefully see you soon. And maybe one day in the real world.
Maybe. You never know. Stranger things have happened.
Yeah. Okay.
It's good to see you, Jay. Stay in touch.
Take care. Cheers. Bye now.